Hi everyone, first episode in person for Attention Zone, so finally you won't see me, just my guest, JP McKerlie from beIN Todd. Hi JP.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, recording in Amsterdam just before IBC and just before Attention Zone Live, the event where GP will also be speaking. Tell me about how you ended up in streaming.
That's a long story. So my career path sort of took a turn when I decided that insurance was relatively boring. And after 4 years of being in accounting and operational accounting, I ended up moving into a telco and got my first sort of taste of, I guess, a explosive growth industry. That was quite some time ago. So it was when telcos were really taking off. And I moved through the consumer functions in that space, looking after forecasting, reporting, which gave me a lot of breadth over the types of activities that businesses can engage in to try and grow customer bases or retain them. And then, you know, being a forecast, it was about prioritization, so understanding that you've got limited resources to execute through, and therefore trying to understand which of those ones had the most impact. And so I got a huge amount of sort of background and exposure to a lot of marketing kind of activities, and then I took that into B2B when I joined Optus in Australia and worked on large-scale deals where, you know, the customer often knows more about the product than you do, and, you know, changes the narrative around marketing, and you need to get quite sharp on the pencil into understanding what you're selling and trying to figure out how to sell it. And coming up to 30 as an Australian, I decided that doing the working holiday tour of the UK was a prerequisite. However, the GFC turned up. And so literally as I was about to move abroad, it became very unwise to sort of leave. And so at the time we pivoted a little bit and looked at other options, and I put my CV onto a website in the Gulf called golftalent.com. And about 10 minutes later, I got a phone call from what was QTEL back in those days, who were in the situation where they'd just deregulated the market and Vodafone had entered. So I ended up popping onto a plane and flying to a place I'd never heard of before, called Doha, and joining QTEL. And then the story sort of evolves from there, because I always sat on the proposition side of telcos, and as convergence with media started to take place, as broadband speeds got quicker and quicker and you could serve media services through telephony, we started to look at how to bring those two propositions together. And so when I joined, I was with a Redo Group for a number of years, but I joined Zain Group, and when I joined, we were looking at acquiring or entering into a joint venture with a media business, with iFlix was the one that we ended up selecting. And so I ended up moving from telco into media, and I was the CEO of iFlix for the joint venture in Arabia. And that was it. After that, I was in the media game. So it was learning about how to produce shows, the relative audiences and, you know, segmentation that comes with it. And it became a completely different journey. And so I've been in media ever since, so probably 10, 12 years now.
So starting from telco, I think you got a good idea of what you need to, you know, with the customers to acquire them, retain them. Possibly the marketing team of telcos are not the most loved people in the world. Maybe with the media is a bit better, but what I mean is you really come from a direct-to-consumer experience, right? Which is crucial. I think in this industry we need, which has been for many years B2B.
Yes.
We need people with that experience. Otherwise.
Yeah. Look, I think the other side of that is telcos are utilities, right? People have to make phone calls. It's not hard to sell someone the reason to make a phone call. That's pretty boring. And unfortunately, it's very cookie cutter as well. So, you know, it's not hard to sell a utility. It is quite hard to sell content, right? You need to generate interest in the asset. You need to make a lot of investment in the marketing of that for there to be enough awareness and desire, you know, to come on and watch it. And I think there's a very big difference between sports content or popular sports content and then entertainment itself. And I think that's where, you know, the current role that I'm in has really shown and exposed the different natures of the media businesses within that industry. I mean, iFlix and Integral STC or Joey TV were entertainment first businesses with sports as a desire, whereas Todd and beIN Media Group is very much a sports first business with entertainment as a secondary consideration. So Todd is, I guess it's the amalgamation of a lot of strategy from beIN Media Group over a number of years. And broadly, you'd understand that as an industry, broadcast was always done, well, depending on what country and territory you're in, but largely through satellite. And it was a distribution from a single point into a receiver that took it and you plugged it into your telly and away you go. I came from the telco background, and we started to transfer that information over the internet. And as a consequence, a couple of things changed. And one of the big ones that really drives, I think, OTT consumption is convenience, right? Anywhere, anytime, any device. You hear that story across every service, whether it's music, streaming, or now social media, right? It doesn't really matter. And so beIN, who was traditionally a satellite broadcast business with a very strong bouquet of sports assets, really needed to step into the OTT space, and Todd was the vehicle through which they did that. I think we had an aspiration and launch in 2022 to make sure that we were live for the World Cup, which was hosted in Qatar. There's nothing like a definitive timeline to put a lot of pressure on a business to deliver. So you can imagine, I think I joined in April 2022, and we had 6 months to build the service virtually from scratch. It had launched, but we didn't have smart TV applications. We didn't have any of sort of the back-end architecture that you'd require. But we were going to host the largest event globally available in about 7 months from when I joined. And so, it was game time. And they did a fantastic job. We incubated the business inside of beIN as the broadcaster, built an entire team from there, created a roadmap, set the architecture up, put all of the infrastructure in place to do the marketing campaigns, acquisitions, the works. And so, Todd was born, and we are the distribution solution for OTT, for all of beIN Media Group's content and assets. And not being bound by satellite means we have more capacity and scalability, and that means that we can broadcast more content than the satellite version of the service. And that is to say that, when you buy a bouquet of rights, particularly as much as what beIN currently have, you will end up with things that you don't end up using on satellite because you don't have the capacity. And so Todd ends up with a little bit more, right? And so when you look at the value proposition that we currently have, we have slightly more content than you can acquire through from beIN itself directly. And we're distributed in a very different way, right? So that's where Todd sort of formed. I think the other question I often get, and I suspect you'll want to ask, is why was it called Todd and not beIN? And it's a good question, and I think it lends itself to probably two really important pieces of information. One of them is beIN Media Group, as it implies, is a group of operating companies, and over time has invested very heavily in diversifying its portfolio of offerings. And most people are not aware that they've got a major stake in Miramax. In fact, at one point, I think we were the majority shareholder and still are, either 41 or 49 or 51%, either way. So there's a very large entertainment part of the beIN Media Group, which is relatively undervalued from the consumer side. And so Todd, as a part of that vision for the business, was to try and generate a more equitable value proposition in the market than beIN Sports, which is very, very strong as a brand is concerned, but very, very associated to sports as a brand as well. And so, that was part of the story. I think the other part is more around market dynamics and pricing. We wanted to ensure that we didn't go after the same customers that we already have. It's a very simple problem, but if I distribute two identical products, one via OTT and one via satellite, and if I make one of them slightly cheaper than the other, then I'm at risk, right? And so obviously we needed to protect the value that we have through that proposition and try and grow into a new market with a new one. So I think that was the two reasons that we ended up with Todd as opposed to, a beIN Plus or a beIN Now or Go or whatever options there may have been.
Fast forward to today. You've done major sport events, so I don't know if it's correct to say you're a mature platform. Where is Todd today? What is the strategy now? What you're doing now, especially with monetization, subscription, and retention? So I think we're at the tipping point. It's an interesting statement. Are we mature? I recently had a conversation with someone. They talk about 0 to 1 and then 1 to 5, right? And so I think we've moved out of 0 to 1. We've gone past that part. We've gone through the literal incubation of building it all out. And we're stepping through that maturity as the toddler, right? We are sort of 3, now nearly 4 years old as a service and a platform. And we've done a lot of what I would describe as open heart surgery to take control over the way that we distribute and deliver content to our end users, as well as the feature sets that support MarTech stacks and acquisition, marketing and retention. And so right now our focus is, it's 12 months, there's another World Cup. We've gone through 6 or 7 major global competitions on the platform and we're starting to get pretty good at it.
I think we want to innovate the way that you engage with those events as a way that differentiates our service from linear television and the linear experience. And I think there's such an awesome set of opportunities for us to explore how to do that. And it requires a lot of forward planning, because it's easy to have the idea and it takes about a year to build it, right? And as a consequence, you need to make sure you pick the right, or back the right horse, if you like, to deliver the right kind of experience. So that's one. But as you come up to scale, obviously your business model changes, right? It moves from acquisition to, retain and acquire, and over time you determine that the size of a subscription business is the acquisition rate divided by the churn rate. That is your flat level of capacity, right? So the lower your churn rate, the more customers you can ultimately have, subject to the markets and a few other bits and pieces. But that's where we're headed, and I think one of the things that we are interested in exploring further is, where do you want to drive your retention strategy, right? There's many ways to address this problem, and I think we are now looking at cutting up our content into different properties and then using different parts of it to, I guess, reach or resonate better with the audiences in a way that's more appealing to them. Most global content partners, if you look at them, don't carry the level of sports that we do, and I think one of the benefits of not having sports for those guys is that your entertainment. You don't ever see someone say, I'm going to sell you my horror pack or my drama product or my comedy bundle, right? Those things don't exist. You take everything that we have, and then we might give you more access insofar as streams, devices, accounts, whatever it may be, or quality. We can do that, but sports is naturally very segmented, right? People either love football or they may hate it. They love tennis and they may also like football, right? So you end up with a very, very segmented market. Now, it's all well and good to have one price point that fits all sports categories, but unfortunately that means you're pricing to your most premium sport. So if I'm a badminton fan, it's a very expensive way to watch, right? So is there an opportunity in that? And I think that's what we're starting to explore. It's, is there a way to try and make these a little bit more bite-sized, a little bit more compartmental on the sports front, so that I can address more sports fans? On the flip side, there's only so much sport on in a week, and then for the other 5 days that aren't weekends, most people turn on the telly to watch something else, right? And so we always say, you acquire with sport, you retain with entertainment. So we need to make sure that our entertainment proposition is strong enough so that there is a reason for you to stay on the platform, because the reason you turn Todd on currently as a segment is because the match is about to begin. What we're trying to prevent is you turning it off and going to one of our entertainment competitors to start watching whatever it is that they've got going, whether it's HBO or whatever it may be. So, therein lies the challenge, and I think from our standpoint, because we are so sports specific as a segment, there's a huge segment of entertainment out there that we can tap into that we currently haven't addressed at all, right?
One thing that you didn't mention, but it's very important, and it adds a lot of complexity. You're not operating in one country.
Yes.
So I let you go there.
So look, we span MENA, right? And I have lots of interesting conversations with various peoples within the teams, but MENA is a very difficult market to manage. And I go back to my days at university, and I remember it escapes me now, but the marketing strategy document, that I think it's Porter's 5 Forces, right? And you're sitting there looking at it, and barriers to entry becomes one of the boxes. And in Australia, I'm sitting there thinking, and I've read the text and I've memorized it, but I don't actually understand what that means. I understand what that means now, right? So, 24 countries across the catchment area, an incredibly diverse set of requirements in each of those territories, a very immature banking segment or sector, and then an awful lot of regulatory implications by each of those territories. And you end up with I love this word, quagmire, a very complex problem that you are trying to sit across and solve. Direct monetization from if I'll take an example. let's pick Disney, right? Disney, global brand, very, very, very well understood and known no matter where you are in the world. Market penetration from a D2C standpoint in MENA is minute, absolutely minute. Question is why, right? So fundamentally, MENA has, from a direct consumer standpoint, payment collections is the most difficult problem to solve. How do I get Ahmed in Algeria to pay me the 10, Algerian, I think it's pounds, dinars, I can't recall actually, online when he doesn't have a bank account, or he has a bank account but that bank does not allow for international transactions, right? So you've got to find ways of cash collection in those markets, and that really pushes us very heavily towards indirect revenue collection, right? And that obviously takes on two forms. The most common one globally is advertising, right? But the other really large one that you'll see in MENA, which is why most market entrants are quite slow to build their businesses, is you go through telcos, right? And telcos are, for many of their various faults, and I've worked at one, so a lot of people used to complain to me about them, but I think one of the things they do particularly well is retail presence. No one has more pops in any territory than a telco. So, even in countries as small as, say, Kuwait, we still had, I think, 2,500 points of presence as a redo, collecting cash on corners across every part of the country. So that's your distribution. You need to figure out how to move and work with these guys to distribute. Now, go back to the scaling issue, 24 countries, generally 3 operators per country means I've got 70 partners. 70 partners with 70 payment gateways with potentially 3 versions of subscriptions in each means I've got hundreds and hundreds of billing opportunities. So if I take hundreds of billing opportunities and I package it against 3 or 6 different value propositions, you end up with thousands of combinations of billing management and propositions and channel management. And so that is MENA in a nutshell. So when I think about Porter's 5 forces and barriers to entry, it takes a long time to connect all of these gateways so that you can actually just serve your content to a customer. Serving it's easy, by the way, you can push it through the internet, but collect cash, that's the challenge. That is that's the one that you want to solve for.
What about the technology behind this?
So look, I think from a tech standpoint, you really want to make sure you've got a agile and nimble solution, right? And we look at, I guess there's multiple layers within this. On the content side, you've got the content entitlement attribution. So how do I allocate a name to whatever asset it is? And then I've got the entitlement management platform, which tells us what the customer is signed up to and is entitled to use. And best in class, which is what we're shooting for, is that the entitlement platform is also the one that I can create the offer on, and then I can push that information through to the content management system so that I don't end up having to build it twice and then telling each system that I'm connecting these two, well, they're identical services, but that's what it's doing. I'd rather push the information through. By doing that, and this is why I talk about agility and time to market, I can move that part of the problem back into the commercial function. It's no longer a change request with technology sitting with products going into the CTO, right? It's commercial looking at running multiple scenarios, very quickly spinning up an opportunity with an offer, an entitlement, and then running that right through the process, and then hopefully looping it back onto the insight. And that's where, again, we've been quite successful in near real-time and real-time analytics that will support us with some of these campaigns that we are running. So I go back to this, conversation about micro packs or sports bundles specific to, say, badminton. We are now in a position where I could create a badminton bundle, sell it through an operator on a B2B distribution only into a specific country, and find out in a weekend whether or not it's sold or not. Right? So that's where we want to go. That part of it's easy. The front end part's now the part where we've got to work on it. So when I say the front end, I mean most of our users subscribe through a web flow of some kind. It's either on a mobile application or into the web subscription funnels. And we need that same flexibility in the presentation layer on those channels to enable us to show you the right thing at the right time. And so this is, the next part of the journey is to try and ensure that we can customize that as much as we possibly can and tailor it to you. So what good looks like is we identify tennis as the segment we're going after. It's a summer of sport. Summer sports fans tend to be quite different to winter sports fans. And we want to build a campaign to acquire for Wimbledon, right? Wimbledon turns up, we go through our Zuckerberg expenditure experience and identify that audience of tennis fans out there, and I want to bring you through on a tennis funnel. So when you click that asset, that ad, you turn up on a landing page on our front end that's been bespoke designed for you, demonstrating tennis as the asset, right? And then the packs that we show to you, or the options, are very specific to tennis, priced in the territory that you're in. So obviously I've now got combinations going on. That sophistication is a combination of what happens in your entitlement platform and your CMS, right? And that's, I think that's the other part of this evolution that will enable us to get really better at monetizing the value of the assets that we have. With the innovation and the enhancement in the complexity, but the ability to manage that complexity as a consequence of using Clean as a back end and using the entitlement capabilities that they have, but also connecting it to the information infrastructure, the data, the analytics, the reporting, which has also been developed in a way that provides triggers and insights directly back to us as Todd, right? So with the entitlement management platform, the notifications that come from the end user are triggered on that platform. So a very simple example would be, and this is kind of an interesting use case because it defines our proposition, but let's say the Champions League's finals is on. Okay, on that specific day, we will be pushing full tilt across all of my communication channels for acquisitions. We tend to say in the industry that there are two types of sports fans. There are core fans that will watch every game, no matter what. And then you have another group which is interested in the key events. And we tend to call them the eventers. So they'll watch the final, they won't watch the season. They'll watch the World Cup, but they won't watch football at all after that. And when you have our value proposition, which is a subscription, they may subscribe on a recurring subscription to watch a game. Now, we don't know who they are at the time, but with our interface, obviously what tends to happen is the user subscribes and then immediately unsubscribes, effectively meaning they've purchased 30 days of access but turned off that recurring subscription. Now, we don't know that until Clean tells us, right? Because that management gets pushed back through the payment gateway into the entitlements platform. They set the trigger, and now we've already got a cohort as a campaign. I know this user's not a football fan, and I should be targeting them with a non-football proposition. So that capability is a part of, the foundations for why we selected the platform in the first place. It enables us to push and define the proposition to our to our content management systems and then straight out into our marketplace. But in parallel, it takes that insight, feeds it back to us to enable us to change that proposition to that user with a different offer. Right? And so, that is what underpins, if you like, the brain of the business, right? We need to be informed, we need to see the insight, we need to be able to act on it in a timely manner to capture the opportunity so that we're not, it's a bit late, 30 days after the game occurred, to then send your retention offer after the cancellation, right? That's just, I'm sorry, by then you're probably going to see your email bounce and you've been lost in the, the plethora of emails that people get these days, right? So, I think that's at the heart of it, that is, it's a very critical part of the overall ecosystem that we work from. And it's in a fantastic position, and I think it's been developed particularly well to enable us and support, because at the end of the day, it's an on-off switch, but it's very informed. And I know that, I speak about it tonight, but the guys have invested a lot of time thinking about what the interactions with the platform mean from a behavioral standpoint, which gives us an insight. And once I have a rationale, then we can address that rationale. If I'm frustrated that this was a poor coffee and I find out quickly enough, I can go to the barista over here and say, by the way, that milk was a bit hot and it became bitter, whatever the story is, and then that action is taken. So I think that timeliness, which is why I talk about agility, is hugely important from a communication standpoint.
I cannot not ask about AI.
Sure. AI. Look, I had this topic comes up a lot, and I think it's I will be absolutely transparent and saying I know that I don't know enough about it, but what I do know about it is it provides a lot of interesting capacity. And so when I speak to a lot of the chief commercial guys at various roundtables, and we all sort of have a bit of a listen to what each other is saying, and taking a few notes as to whether or not we should be grabbing some of those concepts. But the one that commonly comes up is, I think about factories, right? What AIs can do is it's like a very sophisticated factory line. And examples for me would be, we have 10, 12 different formats for creatives that I need to produce for each campaign. There are 250 games that come through from the Premier League alone, or more in fact. So I now need to produce an asset for your phone, for your TV, for my web pages, for my banner rails, for all of these formats. AI has a very clever way of scaling that capacity. So I now no longer need to have 35 creative engineers in the team. I need one that designs the concept, and then the machine can punch out the different formats. That's one example of where it's very handy. We are starting to explore using it in many ways, right? One of the ones that we've been using recently is around subtitling. We're looking at how to, virtually in real time, we produce we acquire a lot of content in English, but we distribute it into territories where we have French, Arabic, and multiple dialects, as well as English, and a little bit of Italian when you look at what happens into Tunisia, as well as, as you go into Iraq, we start to move into Kurdish and a few other languages. So and obviously with a very large Indian, sub-Indian continent segment in territory, we've got all of these languages to try and solve for. These tools are able to then translate this into the language on the fly, right? And so there's a scenario that's not that far away for us that says we could probably translate into 30, 40, maybe 200 languages, virtually for all assets. And that could translate to sport. So now my commentators, because you receive that feed live, right? From, typically an international feed, and typically it's the European competitions that are the strongest. And now I've got a tool set to make that a little bit more personalized. Where it gets really cool is when that gets translated into a voice. And we're now starting to explore creating our own voices, right? So the voiceover for Todd branding in English at the moment is not a person, it's a robot that's been created with a brand tone of voice that we've been defining over some period of time, that we hope to try and use consistently, that resonates with the audience, that becomes identifiable as Todd. That's very much an AI functionality.
What about the insights analytics side of things?
Yeah. So I'll give you one more before I step to that, and then we'll come back to it as the piece. So the other one that's quite exciting is highlights, right? So analytics and highlights. Who's your favorite player? And if I was able to customize the highlights that we have to the player that you like to see, it's going to be more engaging for you. Highlights is one of the most invaluable parts of the sports rights bouquet. We have hundreds of millions of views of our highlights as beIN Media Group on a weekly basis. So I think this is where the AI function can be really interesting, and say, if you're a big Messi fan and that's the guy that you want to see mostly in your highlights, we can edit that we can create that on the fly and deliver that to you. That's the concept that we're looking for. So we've started to explore some companies that do that. And I think this then rolls back into your insights and analytics, because AI does have the facility to, we used to call it unstructured data at one point in time, but to manage and manipulate very large data sets that are disparate and bring back insights that are actionable, right? And so you can give it an instruction that says something along the lines of, let's find every person that watched 70% of a particular film, build them into a cohort, and then define what we think they're going to like next, or rec engine style sort of scenarios. That is definitely what is coming up. The other one that I really like at the moment is in how that engagement rate and engagement and retention go hand in hand, is the gamification side that AI enables you to do. So everyone loves good trivia questions, and often the reason that you watch commentary is because the commentators have been given a very extensive set of details about the people in the match, the number of kids that they have, the favorite color that they have, and so on and so forth, which is great, and it's very insightful. Now, AI is in a position to use that same information set, grab it from virtually anywhere, and then build engagement-based gamification strategies. And trivias, polls, all those sorts of things are very, very widely available as a consequence of that capability. At the moment, we're introducing that as a part of the solution, and I'm going to be very curious as to understand, probably through another AI-based question, whether or not there is a churn differential between users that engage on polling and those that don't, or the number of users that have got multiple profiles against those that don't. It takes the grunt work out of asking the questions, and I think that's one of the massive benefits that we expect to see from it.